Pine Creek wasn't marked on any tourist map. The town, with a population of just over 15,000, nestled among the hills in the northern part of the state, where the main street stretched for just a mile, and all the locals knew each other, if not by name, then at least by sight. There was only one traffic light, and the local newspaper was published 3 times a week. In places like this, rumors spread faster than official news, and a person's reputation becomes their most valuable asset. That is why Judge Robert Hollis valued his impeccable reputation so highly. 22 years as a district judge, respected by his colleagues, with an impeccable record. At 56, he was the embodiment of stability and justice in Pine Creek. Every morning, at exactly 7:30, the judge would walk into Donna's cafe. This ritual had become as unchanging as the gray pinstriped suit he wore on Tuesdays and Thursdays. His standard order, black coffee and avocado toast, awaited him at the corner table by the window. "Good morning, Your Honor," nodded Donna, the elderly proprietor. "It's going to be another hot day." "Yes, the forecast is for 90 degrees by noon," replied Hollis, smoothing the napkin on his lap. "The air conditioning in the courtroom has been on the fritz for 2 weeks now." At the next table, the local pharmacist was discussing the upcoming school football game with a gym teacher. The judge nodded to them as usual and opened the latest issue of the Pine Creek Gazette. His photo was on the front page with the headline, "Judge Hollis to preside over Midwest Chemicals River pollution case." It was the most high-profile case in the county in the last 15 years. The chemical plant, which employed 1/3 of the town's residents, was accused of dumping toxic waste into the local river. Hollis knew that whatever his decision, it would divide the town in two. "More coffee, Judge?" asked an unfamiliar voice. Hollis looked up and saw a young woman with a coffee pot. Her name tag read, Emily. "Are you new here?" he asked, holding out his cup. "Second week," she smiled. "I'm working as a waitress to pay for school." "And where do you study?" the judge asked. "Law school in Ridgeview, 2nd year," she said proudly. Robert took a closer look at the girl. She looked to be in her early 20s. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a high cheekboned face. Her large brown eyes showed a determination familiar to Holly from his own youth. "Law is not an easy path," he remarked. "But it's worth the effort," Emily replied confidently. "I'm going to specialize in environmental law. That's actually why I recognized you. Your case against Midwest Chemicals is definitely going to be in the textbooks." The judge smiled modestly, but felt a slight sense of satisfaction that his work was inspiring the younger generation. "I read everything I can find on cases like this," Emily continued. "If I could watch a real trial up close—" "I'm sorry, I'm probably being too pushy," she said, blushing and backing toward the kitchen. "The hearings are open to the public," said Hollis. "Thursday, 10 in the morning." The girl's eyes lit up. "I'll definitely be there, thank you, Your Honor." Judge Hollis's house was in the old part of town, a 2-story Victorian with a well-kept garden. His wife, Margaret, had been teaching literature at Pine Creek High School for over 20 years. Their marriage was as stable and respectable as Robert's career. "Alex called," Margaret said when her husband entered the kitchen that evening. "He and Jennifer want to come over with the kids for Independence Day." The judge nodded, thinking about the upcoming reunion with his son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. Family ties were another brick in the foundation of his impeccable reputation. "How was your day?" Margaret asked, setting a plate of dinner in front of her husband. "The usual routine," he replied, "preparing for the Midwest Chemicals case." "That's all anyone in town is talking about," she sighed. "Half of my students are children of factory workers, and the other half live by the river. No matter how you decide, someone will be unhappy." "I'll be guided only by the law and the facts," Hollis said firmly. As always, on Thursday the courtroom was packed. Representatives from Midwest Chemicals, environmental activists, local newspaper reporters, and curious residents filled every seat. Robert spotted Emily in the back row, taking notes in her notebook and watching the proceedings closely. After the hearing, when the courtroom was almost empty, she approached him. "Your Honor, that was incredibly informative," the girl said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, "especially the way you questioned the defense expert about the sampling methodology." Robert was surprised by her keen observation. "You've got it. In environmental cases, methodology is often the key issue." I'm writing a term paper on the evidence base in environmental disputes, Emily confessed. I have a lot of questions, but I understand you're very busy. The judge hesitated only for a moment. I sometimes advise law students. If you have specific questions about legal practice, I could set aside some time. That was how their professional acquaintance began. Meetings in the judge's office after work, discussions of legal subtleties, recommendations for literature. Emily proved to be a capable student, quick on the uptake, asking insightful questions, and displaying a determination rare among young people. For the first time in a long time, Robert felt like a mentor, an inspiration. It flattered his ego. In the eyes of the young student, he saw respect and admiration that he had long since ceased to see in his own son or colleagues, who were accustomed to his status. "Sorry for the mess," Emily said, placing a cup of coffee in front of the judge. They were sitting in her small apartment, cluttered with law books and printouts of court decisions. "Thank you for agreeing to look over my term paper before I turn it in." "You're welcome," Hollis replied, leafing through the pages of her work. "You really have a talent for law. Your analysis of the precedents is very thorough. It's thanks to your guidance," the girl smiled, sitting down next to him on the couch. "You know, before I met you, I doubted I could ever be a real lawyer. In college, there are so many kids from wealthy families with connections. And I'm just a girl from a small town who works as a waitress." "Origin and connections don't make a good lawyer," the judge remarked. "What matters is knowledge, ethics, and dedication to the law." Their shoulders touched, and Robert caught a whiff of her perfume, something fresh, with a hint of jasmine. For a moment, it seemed as if the air in the room had thickened. "You've become more than a mentor to me," Emily said quietly, looking into his eyes. "You're the only one who truly believes in me." The moment lingered. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Hollis knew he should stand up, say goodbye politely, and leave. Instead, he felt his hand touch her cheek. At dinner, Margaret noticed that her husband was distracted. "You seem absent today," she said. "Is everything okay?" "Just tired," Robert replied. "The Midwest case requires my full attention." "You've been working late for 3 weeks now," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Maybe you should take a day off?" "Soon," he promised, "as soon as I make a decision." At that moment, his phone rang. Seeing the name on the screen, the judge felt his pulse quicken. "Sorry, I have to take this. It's work," he said and left the room. "Robert?" Emily's voice sounded agitated. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. It's about the Midwest case." "I can't talk about it right now," the judge replied quietly. "It's not that," she said, her tone becoming tense. "I found something. Documents that weren't presented in court. It could change everything." Hollis felt a chill run down his spine. "Where did you get these documents?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is what's in them. We need to meet." The judge looked around. The sound of dishes being cleared by Margaret came from the dining room. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow after work, same place." Hanging up the phone, Robert realized he had crossed a line where his impeccable reputation was now hanging by a thread. Jason Taylor stayed late in his office at the district attorney's office. On the desk in front of him lay a folder with documents and a photograph of Judge Hollis entering a house on the outskirts of town, the place where Jason knew law student Emily Reed rented an apartment. "What are you up to, Robert?" Jason muttered under his breath, remembering how Judge Hollis had taken him under his wing 8 years ago and helped him get a job at the district attorney's office. "And what are you getting me into?" Outside, dusk was falling, and with it, a shadow loomed over Pine Creek. A shadow of a scandal that could destroy not only the impeccable reputation of a respected judge, but also the lives of everyone connected to him. A drizzling rain drummed on the roof of Judge Hollis's car, parked 3 blocks from Emily's apartment. Such precautions had become routine for him in recent weeks. Robert glanced at his watch. 7:45 p.m. He had told Margaret that he would be staying late at the office to work on the Midwest verdict. Another lie in a growing web of deceit. The judge turned up the collar of his coat, pulled his hat down over his eyes, and headed for the nondescript building where Emily lived. Looking around, he quickly climbed to the 2nd floor. The door opened before he had a chance to knock. "I thought you weren't coming." Emily looked tense, her usual confidence replaced by nervousness. "You said it was important," Robert replied, stepping inside and taking off his wet coat. What documents did you find? Emily took a folder out of the desk drawer. Internal reports from the Midwest laboratory. They conducted their own water tests 3 years ago and knew about the chemical concentrations. Here are the results and memos with recommendations on how to fix the problem, which they ignored. The judge studied the papers carefully. Where did you get these? His voice sounded tense. Emily looked away. Does it matter? What matters is that they prove the company's management deliberately disregarded environmental regulations. That's what the prosecution was missing. Emily, Robert put the documents on the table. Where did you get these? My cousin works in their archives, she admitted reluctantly. He lent me these copies for one night. You do realize that this is illegally obtained evidence? It can't be used in court. But now you know the truth, Emily exclaimed. Isn't that what justice is all about? Robert shook his head. Justice is based on law and procedure. If I make a decision based on illegally obtained evidence, so you'll let them get away with it? After everything you've told me about fairness? About protecting the law? Her eyes were filled with disappointment. Hollis felt cornered. On the one hand, professional ethics demanded that he ignore the documents. On the other, they contained irrefutable evidence of Midwest Chemical's guilt. I need to think about it, he finally said. This is a difficult situation. It's perfectly clear to me, Emily said, moving closer. You always told me that true justice sometimes requires the courage to go beyond formalities. She put her hand on his shoulder. Isn't that why I admire you? Because you're not afraid to make the right choice, even when it's difficult? There was manipulation in her words, and part of Robert recognized it. But another part, the part that enjoyed feeling important in the eyes of a young woman, wanted to believe she was sincere. You won't tell anyone about these documents, will you? He asked. Of course not. This will stay between us, she said, leaning closer to him. Just like everything else. In the district attorney's office, Jason Taylor sat across from Sheriff David Carson. The old friend of Judge Hollis looked worried. Are you sure about this, Jason? These are serious charges. I have photos, Dave. Taylor tapped his finger on the folder on the table. Judge Hollis regularly visits Emily Reed's apartment in the evening and stays there for a long time. Maybe there's an innocent explanation. Robert always helped young lawyers. She could have asked for advice. At 9 o'clock at night? In her apartment? Jason raised an eyebrow skeptically. And you really think Margaret knows about these visits? The sheriff sighed heavily. What do you want, Jason? Why are you showing me this? I need to know whose side you're on if this comes out. The judge is presiding over the case of the year. The future of half the town depends on his decision. And if it turns out he's having an affair with a student... Jesus, Jason, we're talking about Robert Hollis, the sheriff exclaimed. I've known that man for 30 years. He's my daughter's godfather. People change, or maybe we never really knew them. Taylor leaned back in his chair. I respect the judge too. He's done more for me than my own father. That's why I want to settle this quietly before it blows up into a scandal. And what do you suggest? Talk to him. Remind him what's at stake. The sheriff shook his head. That sounds like blackmail, Jason. It sounds like an attempt to save the reputation of a man we both respect before he makes an irreparable mistake. Margaret Hollis was checking her students' essays when she heard the front door open and close. The clock read 10:17 p.m. Robert, she called. Yes, dear. Sorry I'm late. He appeared in the office doorway, looking tired. He smelled of rain and something else. Perfume. Did you have dinner? Margaret asked, taking off her reading glasses. I grabbed a sandwich at the office. He rubbed his eyes. How was your day? The usual? Faculty meeting, then classes. She looked at her husband intently. You look exhausted. This case, it's more complicated than I thought. Margaret put down her pen. The case or something else, Robert? You haven't been yourself for the last few weeks. You're always late. You hardly talk to me. What's going on? Nothing's going on, he replied too quickly. Just pressure at work. You know how everyone is looking at this case. I've known you for 32 years, Robert. I can tell when you're hiding something. The judge felt a cold shiver run down his spine. I'm tired, Margaret. Let's talk tomorrow. He went upstairs, avoiding further conversation. In the bathroom, Robert stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time, as if searching for signs of the man he once was, a man of principles, a man worthy of respect. "Judge Hollis, can I have a minute of your time?" Jason Taylor's voice caught Robert off guard as he was leaving the courthouse the next day. "Jason, of course. Is it urgent?" "Not here," the assistant district attorney said quietly. "Maybe we could take a walk." They headed for a small park across the street from the courthouse. It was a clear day, and the benches were occupied by mothers with children and retirees feeding pigeons. "I'm concerned, Judge," Jason began when they reached a relatively deserted alley. "What's the matter?" Hollis tried to sound calm, though he was tense inside. "Emily Reed." The two words, spoken casually, hit Robert harder than any physical blow. "What about her?" He tried to keep his voice steady. "I know about your meetings." Jason stopped and looked his mentor straight in the eye. "At her apartment, in the evenings." Hollis felt the ground slip away from under his feet. "Jason, I'll explain." "No need, Judge," the young prosecutor interrupted him. "Whatever is going on between you is your business. But it's getting dangerous. People are starting to notice. Questions are being asked." "What questions? Who's asking?" The alarm in the judge's voice was obvious. "No one in particular yet. But it can't go on like this, especially with the Midwest case." "What does that case have to do with this?" Hollis asked sharply. "Emily is very interested in that trial, perhaps too interested. You do know that her father was one of the first to file a complaint about the river pollution, right? The fisherman who lost his business because of the chemical dumping?" Robert froze. This information was news to him. "I didn't know." "It's surprising she didn't tell you," Jason said with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "You two are so close." "What do you want, Jason? Just say it." "I want to protect you, Judge. From yourself, if necessary. I suggest you stop these meetings. Right now. Before the verdict is handed down. Before all of this becomes public knowledge." Hollis felt a surge of anger. "Are you threatening me?" "No, sir, I'm trying to save your career and possibly your family." They continued walking in heavy silence. Finally, the judge spoke. "I appreciate your concern, Jason. I really do. But you don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Help me understand why a respected judge is risking everything for a girl who is young enough to be his daughter." "It's complicated. That's what they always say, Judge. But in reality, it's very simple. You are violating your own principles, the very principles you taught me." These words struck Robert to the core. He stopped and turned to his former student. "Listen to me carefully, Jason. I appreciate your concern. But what is happening in my personal life has no bearing on my professional duties. I will deliver my verdict in the Midwest case strictly on the basis of the evidence presented in court and the law, as I have always done." "I hope so, Your Honor," Taylor replied formally, "because many people in this town are counting on your impartiality." That evening, Emily did not show up for their scheduled meeting. Instead, she sent a message. "We need to talk. Come over tomorrow at 8 p.m. It's important." Robert spent a restless night pondering Jason's words. Was Emily hiding something? Was she using their relationship to influence the outcome of the case? The thought was painful, but not without logic. The next day, he decided to check the information about her father. The court archives did indeed contain a complaint filed 4 years earlier by Thomas Reed, a professional fisherman, against Midwest Chemicals. The case had been closed due to lack of evidence. When Robert entered Emily's apartment that evening, his face was grim. "Why didn't you tell me about your father?" he asked bluntly. Emily froze, then slowly closed the door. "Should I have? You don't think it's important to mention that you have a personal interest in the outcome of the Midwest case?" "I thought we had a common interest. Justice," she retorted. "Isn't that what you've told me over and over again? Isn't that why you became a judge?" "Don't play games, Emily. You deliberately hid this fact from me. And you deliberately hide our relationship from your wife." Her voice grew colder. "We all hide things, Robert." The tension between them was almost palpable. For the first time, the judge saw Emily not as an admiring student, but as a calculating young woman who might be using him for her own ends. "Why did you want to see me?" he asked after a pause. Emily took an envelope out of her bag and handed it to him. Inside were printouts of emails between Midwest executives and city council members, emails that had never appeared in the case file. "Where did you get these?" Robert's voice trembled with suppressed anger. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that they bribed officials, for years, so they would turn a blind eye to violations." "You hacked into their email? That's a federal crime, Emily." "I didn't hack anything," she replied firmly. "These emails were forwarded to me by an anonymous source. And you expect me to believe that? I expect you to do the right thing, as a judge, as a man She faltered. "As a man I respect." Robert placed the envelope on the table. "You don't understand what you're asking. If I use illegally obtained evidence—" "I'm not asking you to use it directly," Emily interrupted. "I'm asking you to simply know the truth when you make your decision. The truth must be proven in court according to the law. The law protects the guilty when they have enough money for good lawyers." Emily's voice was bitter. "My father lost everything because of that company. His business, his health. He died last year of cancer. The doctors say it could have been caused by exposure to the very chemicals that Midwest dumped into the river." Tears glistened in her eyes, and Robert felt torn by conflicting emotions. "I'm sorry about your father, Emily. I really am. But that doesn't change my duty to follow the law." "Even if the law is unfair?" she asked quietly. "The law is all we have. Without it, there would be chaos." Emily moved closer and placed her hands on his chest. "Robert, I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to just be a man, the man I fell in love with." The word "fell" hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Robert knew he should pull away, walk away, end it all. Instead, he pulled her closer. 10 miles from Pine Creek, at a bend in the river, a man in fishing boots carefully collected water samples in plastic containers. His hands, protected by gloves, moved methodically, with professional precision. When he was done, he took out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the shore, where traces of chemical deposits were clearly visible. Then he dialed a number. "Hello?" Emily's voice sounded tense. "It's me. I found another dump site. It's fresh, no more than a week old. I have samples and photos." "Great, but we may not need them. I have another way to convince the judge." "Are you sure?" Hollis is known for his commitment to the letter of the law. "Everyone has a weak spot," Emily said, her voice taking on a steely tone. "Even the most principled judge. You're playing a dangerous game, Emily." "This isn't a game," she replied. "This is justice." A tense silence hung in the Pine Creek courtroom. Judge Hollis was reviewing the records of the Midwest Chemicals case for the third time that day. Before him lay two options. One, acquitting the company due to lack of legally admissible evidence. The other, finding it guilty based on the materials presented by the prosecution, with the maximum fine and a demand for immediate cessation of production until all violations were remedied. Through the window, Robert watched a group of factory workers with signs reading, "Jobs are more important than fish," gather in front of the courthouse. Environmental activists with opposing slogans stood nearby. Police held back both sides, preventing the conflict from escalating into an open confrontation. The door opened and Jason Taylor entered. "Your Honor, I didn't want to disturb you, but I thought you should know. It's getting restless outside." "I see," Hollis replied without turning away from the window. "Have you made a decision?" Jason asked cautiously. "Almost." The judge finally turned to him. "What would you do in my place, Jason? Purely hypothetically." The young prosecutor was surprised. In 8 years of working with Hollis, he had never been asked for his opinion on a decision. "I would follow the law, Your Honor, as you taught me." "And if the law cannot achieve justice?" "Then the problem lies with the law, not the judge," Taylor replied firmly. "If the law has flaws, it's up to the lawmakers to fix them, not us. Otherwise, what's left of the legal system?" Robert nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "You know, I got an anonymous letter yesterday. It had documents proving Midwest's guilt, documents that were never presented in court." Jason tensed. "Do you think it's related to our previous conversation?" "I don't know. The letter was sent to my work address. There was no return address." "You don't think it's her?" "I don't know," the judge repeated. "But that's not what's bothering me. What's bothering me is the fact that I know this evidence exists. How can I render an impartial decision? You have to ignore it, Jason said. You know that as well as I do. I know, Hollis sighed heavily. But knowing and doing are two different things. Judge, Jason's voice became insistent, she's manipulating you. She's using your feelings to influence your decision. My feelings, Jason? Robert raised an eyebrow. What feelings are you talking about? The ones that make smart people do stupid things. An awkward silence hung between them. She called me this morning, the judge finally said. She asked to meet tonight. And you're going to go? Jason's voice sounded incredulous. No, Hollis replied firmly. I'm done with this case, and with her. Taylor nodded with visible relief. The right decision, Your Honor. When the young prosecutor left, Robert turned back to the window. The line between the workers and the activists was becoming increasingly tense. It was a symbol of the rift running through the city, a rift that now ran through his own life as well. Margaret Hollis sat in her car across from the building where Emily Reed lived. Her heart was pounding, and her palms were sweaty as she gripped the steering wheel. She hadn't planned to follow her. It was just intuition, accumulated suspicions, and a random address she'd seen in her husband's phone that had brought her here. What am I doing here? She muttered under her breath. 32 years of marriage, 2 grown children, grandchildren, and here she was, sitting in her car, stalking her husband like a teenager. It was humiliating. Margaret was about to drive away when she saw a familiar figure entering the building. Robert. Despite the fact that just an hour ago he had told her he would be late because he was working on a verdict, the woman felt nausea rising in her throat. It was one thing to suspect, but quite another to know for sure. She opened the glove compartment and took out a bottle of heart drops. Her hands were shaking so badly that some of the medicine spilled onto her blouse. "Pull yourself together," she ordered herself. "You're not some weak little girl." Margaret got out of the car and walked purposefully toward the building. Glancing at the list of residents, she found the name E. Reed next to the doorbell for apartment 2B. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button. "You shouldn't have come," Emily said when Robert entered her apartment. "You said you couldn't meet today." "I changed my mind," the judge replied. "We need to talk." "I like it when you take the initiative," she said, moving to hug him. But Robert pulled away. "Emily, this has to stop." Her smile faded. "What exactly?" "Everything. Our meetings, our relationship. It's wrong. I'm letting a lot of people down. My family, my profession." "What about me?" she interrupted. "Am I on that list too?" "Especially you," Robert said quietly. "I can't give you what you deserve. Do you even know what I deserve?" Her voice took on an icy tone. "Or what I want. Emily, please, don't make this difficult." "What's going on, Robert? Did Jason Taylor get to you? Or is your wife suspecting something?" She crossed her arms over her chest. "That's not it. I'm giving my verdict on Midwest tomorrow, and I need to be sure that my decision isn't influenced by anything personal." "So that's what this is about." Emily smiled bitterly. "You're afraid that our relationship will influence your decision, or worse, that someone will suspect that it has." "Isn't that what you wanted?" the judge asked sharply. "You never told me about your father, about his lawsuit against Midwest, about his death. Why, Emily?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You'd think I was using you. And aren't you?" Emily moved close to him, her eyes burning with anger. "Yes, at first, maybe. I really wanted to influence your decision. But then, everything changed. My feelings for you changed." "What feelings, Emily? You're smart enough to know there can be nothing real between us." "Why? Because of the age difference? Because of your wife? Because of your reputation? Because of all of it?" Robert raised his voice. "I'm in a bind. Any decision I make on this case will now be compromised. If I vote against Midwest, everyone will think you influenced me. If I vote for it, they'll think I tried to prove the opposite. Either way, it won't be a clean decision based on the law. Have you ever considered that there might be something wrong with the law if it allows a corporation to kill people and get away with it? The case is before the court. The evidence has been presented. The prosecution is incompetent. They don't have half the material I have." Material obtained illegally. Emily, I can't use it. You have to understand that. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Emily tensed. Did you tell anyone you'd be here? No. Are you expecting someone? No. They froze, staring at each other. The doorbell rang again, more insistently. Don't answer it, Robert whispered. Emily slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. She recoiled, turning pale. Who is it? The judge asked tensely. Your wife, Emily whispered. Hollis froze, feeling the blood drain from his face. Are you sure? I saw her pictures on the internet. It's her. The doorbell rang again, accompanied by a knock on the door. Miss Reed, I know you're home. I'm Robert Hollis's wife. We need to talk. Margaret's voice sounded surprisingly calm. It frightened Robert more than if she had been screaming. What should I do? Emily asked in a panic. Open the door. I'll talk to her. Are you crazy? She'll kill us both. She's my wife. I have to talk to her. And you're leaving me to deal with the consequences? You just said it was over between us. The knocking on the door grew louder. I know my husband is with you, Miss Reed. Please open the door or I'll call the police. She's bluffing, Emily whispered. She won't call the police and cause a public scene. You don't know Margaret, Robert replied. She's perfectly capable of doing that. He walked over to the door. Margaret, it's me. I'll be right out and we'll talk. I want to see both of you, came the voice from behind the door. I deserve an explanation. Emily and Robert exchanged glances. Then the girl slowly opened the door. Margaret Hollis entered, looking surprisingly composed for a woman who had just discovered her husband in the apartment of his young mistress. She glanced around the room, noticing the half-empty glass of whiskey on Robert's desk and the open book on the sofa, all signs that her husband was a frequent visitor here. Mrs. Hollis, Emily began. Please don't, Margaret interrupted. I don't want to hear any excuses. She turned to her husband. How long has this been going on? Robert couldn't look her in the eye. 2 months. Is she your student? Mentoring? Her voice was dripping with sarcasm. I'm not his student, Emily interjected. I'm an independent person who makes my own decisions. And what decision did you make, Miss Reed? To seduce a married man twice your age? It's not that simple. No, it is that simple. Margaret cut her off. You're destroying a family I've spent 32 years building. Margaret, Robert took a step toward his wife, but she backed away. I was going to end it. That's why I came here. How convenient, the woman sneered bitterly. Right before I found you. It's true, the judge insisted. Ask Emily. I'm not going to ask that woman anything. Margaret paused, clearly holding back harsher words. I'm not interested in the details of your relationship. I'm only interested in one thing. Your decision, Robert. My decision? He repeated. Yes. What do you choose? Your family or this? She gestured around the apartment and its owner. Emily tensed, her gaze darting to Robert. Her eyes showed a mixture of fear and defiance. Margaret, let's talk about this at home. Hollis tried to reason with his wife. This isn't the place for such conversations. Where is? In our bedroom, where you lied to me for months. At dinner with the children, pretending everything was fine. Pain broke through Margaret's voice for the first time. He's already made his choice, Emily said suddenly. He came here today to break up with me, to save your perfect family and his impeccable reputation. Margaret looked at the girl in surprise, then turned her gaze to her husband. Is that true? Yes, Robert replied quietly. Because you really choose your family? Or because you're afraid of a scandal on the eve of an important verdict? That's not a fair question. Yes, it is. The only fair question all evening. Are you choosing us or your career? He's choosing his career, Emily interjected. He always has. And you know that, Mrs. Hollis. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing here asking him to choose. You already know the answer. Margaret turned to the girl, and something like sympathy flashed in her eyes. You think you know him, but you're wrong. I know enough, Emily replied stubbornly. You know he'll never leave his wife for a mistress? That his reputation and career will always come first? That he's using you and will throw you away when you become a hindrance? It doesn't matter anymore, Emily's voice faltered. It's over. No, it's not over. Margaret objected, a strange determination creeping into her voice. "I didn't spend my whole life with this man to let him get away with this." She turned to her husband. "I've packed my things. They're in the car. I'm going to my sister's in Ridgeview. I'll tell the children I need time to think. The official version is a midlife crisis, a reevaluation of values. Whatever. The reality is that you have time before the verdict is announced to decide who you really are. A judge, a husband, or just a frightened man trying to keep all his worlds from colliding." With that, Margaret headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "And Miss Reed, if you really think you can influence his decision on the Midwest case using this relationship, you are deeply mistaken. Robert Hollis may betray everything, but not his idea of justice. It is more important to him than anything else. More important than me, more important than you, more important than himself. Remember that." The door closed, and a heavy silence hung in the apartment. "Margaret!" Robert came to his senses and rushed after his wife. Running out into the stairwell, he saw only the elevator doors closing. When he returned to the apartment, Emily was standing at the window, looking out at the street. Her shoulders were tense. "You have to go after her," she said without turning around. "Emily?" "No, Robert. She's right. You'll never choose me. And it's not about age or her rights as a wife. It's you. You're incapable of making a choice that could damage your status." "That's not fair." "Fair," Emily smiled bitterly. "You always talk about fairness, but what do you know about it? True fairness requires sacrifice, risk, and you never take risks, Robert. You just pretend." Her words hurt him more than he expected. "I'll leave, but we need to finish this conversation. Tomorrow, after the verdict is announced." "No need," Emily shook her head. "I understand everything. Your wife is more perceptive than you think. She really knows you." Robert wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He left the apartment silently, feeling the world he had so carefully built over decades crumbling around him. It was past midnight, and Jason Taylor was still sitting in his office, looking through files on his computer. The screen was open to Emily Reed's social media page. He scrolled through photos, posts, comments, anything that might give him a clue as to her true intentions. The phone rang. "Taylor?" he answered. "It's Dave. You asked me to let you know if there was any news about the judge. What happened?" Jason sat up straight in his chair. "Margaret's gone. She packed her things and went to her sister's in Ridgeview. My officer just saw her leaving town." "Damn it!" Jason cursed. "What about the judge?" "He came home about an hour ago, alone." "Did he talk to you?" "No, but he looked fine." "Thanks, Dave. Keep me posted." Jason threw the phone on the desk and rubbed his tired eyes. The situation was spiraling out of control. Tomorrow, the entire city would be in court awaiting the verdict in the most high-profile case of the decade. And the judge who was supposed to deliver it was going through the collapse of his personal life. Returning to the screen, Jason noticed a photo he hadn't seen before. It showed Emily standing next to a middle-aged man he didn't recognize. The caption read, "With Uncle Patrick. You'd be proud of me, Dad." Jason made a note to check out this Patrick. Something told him that this could be the missing link. In his empty house, Robert Hollis sat in the dark, holding a glass of whiskey. On the table in front of him lay two options for resolving the Midwest case. Next to it was an anonymous letter with evidence of the corporation's guilt. His life, which had seemed so solid and stable, was falling apart like a house of cards. Margaret was gone. His relationship with Emily was in ruins. The reputation he cherished so much was hanging by a thread. And yet tomorrow he had to make a decision that would determine not only his own fate, but the fate of an entire city. Would he be able to separate his personal problems from his professional duty? And more importantly, which was more important, the letter of the law or the spirit of justice? His phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "Justice demands the truth. The whole truth about Midwest will be revealed tomorrow. Your choice is to be on the right side of history or against it." Robert turned off his phone and downed the rest of his whiskey. The choice he had been avoiding his entire life had caught up with him at the worst possible moment, and there was no way to avoid it now. In a small motel on the outskirts of Pine Creek, Emily Reed was packing her things into a sports bag. Her movements were sharp, her eyes red from crying. There was a knock at the door, The girl froze, then cautiously approached and looked through the peephole. "It's me," said a man's voice. Emily opened the door, letting in a middle-aged man with a tired face and graying temples. "Did you get everything ready?" she asked instead of greeting him. "Yes. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, right before the verdict is announced, everyone will be there." "Good," Emily nodded. "And the documents?" "Copies have been distributed to all the local journalists. Anonymously, of course." "Excellent, Uncle Patrick." She smiled weakly. "Dad would have been proud." "Thomas would have wanted this done legally," the man sighed. "We tried for years. And where did that get us? To his grave and the killers walking free." "What about the judge? Are you sure he won't let us down?" Emily turned away, hiding her expression. "He'll do what he has to do. Either way, Midwest will get what it deserves tomorrow, with or without his help." Patrick looked at his niece with concern. "Something happened? You seem different." "Everything's fine," Emily replied too quickly. "I'm just tired of it all. I want tomorrow to finally come and be over." "Be careful tomorrow. There will be a lot of people there and the situation could get out of hand." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Just make sure you do your part." When her uncle left, Emily took a framed photo out of her bag. It was of her and her father fishing, both smiling happily. It was a year before the river became too toxic for fish, before her father started coughing up blood, before cancer ate him from the inside out. "Tomorrow, Dad," she whispered, running her finger over the image. "Tomorrow they'll pay." The morning of the verdict was cloudy. Heavy clouds hung over Pine Creek, as if heralding a storm. By 8 o'clock, the square in front of the courthouse was already filled with people. Police cordons separated Midwest workers from environmental activists. Sheriff Carson personally coordinated security, noting with concern that at least 200 people had gathered on each side. In his office, Judge Hollis was preparing for the hearing. He had not slept all night, going over his decision in his head over and over again. In the end, he settled on a wording that he thought would satisfy both sides without violating his judicial oath. He knew that this verdict would determine not only the fate of Midwest Chemicals, but also his own future. The phone rang. It was Margaret. "Yes?" he answered, surprised by the call. "I just wanted to say, remember who you are, Robert." His wife's voice sounded tired but determined. "Whatever happens today, stay true to yourself." "Margaret, Not now, after everything, we'll talk." The phone went dead, leaving Robert alone with the echoing emptiness of his office and the weight of the decision ahead of him. Jason Taylor was busy making final preparations for the meeting when an employee from the IT department entered his office. "You requested information on Patrick Reed. This is all I could find." Jason looked through the documents and frowned. Chemical engineer fired from Midwest 6 years ago. Filed complaints against the company after being fired. Worked in a lab that analyzed water samples. Brother of Thomas Reed, Emily's father. He looked up. "Thanks, that's very helpful." Left alone, Jason quickly dialed a number. "Sheriff, this is Taylor. We have a problem. I think Emily Reed and her uncle are planning something for today. He's a former Midwest employee with a personal grudge against the company." "Yes, I'm on my way to the courthouse right now." The courtroom was packed. Journalists, members of the public, lawyers from both sides, all were waiting for Judge Hollis to appear. In the front row sat the executives of Midwest Chemicals on one side and representatives of environmental organizations on the other. Emily slipped into the courtroom at the last moment and took a seat in the back. She was pale but determined. In her bag was a folder with documents, a copy of the one that every journalist in the courtroom already had. At 10 a.m., Judge Hollis entered the courtroom. Everyone stood up. The clerk announced the start of the hearing. "Before I announce my decision in the case of Town of Pine Creek v. Midwest Chemicals," the judge began, "I would like to make a statement." A whisper ran through the room. This was unusual. "For 22 years, I have had the honor of serving justice in this city. All these years I have been guided by one principle, the letter of the law. But today I am forced to admit that sometimes the letter of the law and the spirit of justice can conflict with each other." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Robert noticed how tense the Midwest lawyers had become. Hope appeared on the faces of the environmental activists. Over the past few weeks, I have become aware of facts that have not been presented in this court. Facts that I am not entitled to consider in reaching my decision because they have not gone through the proper legal process. Nevertheless, knowing them, I cannot render a verdict without struggling with my own conscience. At that moment, the courtroom doors swung open. Patrick Reed entered with a large display in his hands. He was followed by dozens of people carrying signs reading "The Truth About Midwest" and "Justice for the Victims." "Your Honor," Patrick exclaimed, "here is the evidence that Midwest has been hiding for years." Sheriff Carson and the security guards rushed toward the intruders, but it was too late. Patrick had managed to turn on the display, which showed graphs, tables, and photographs of the company's environmental violations. "These are the results of their own tests. They knew about the toxic discharges. They saw people dying and kept silent." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Journalists photographed the screen, security guards tried to remove the protesters, and Midwest's lawyers shouted about illegal intrusion and inadmissible evidence. "Order in the court!" Judge Hollis's voice cut through the chaos. "Restore order immediately." When the noise subsided a little, Hollis continued, "In light of these events, I am adjourning the hearing. Security, remove all violators. Representatives of both sides remain." Patrick Reed and the other protesters were escorted out of the courtroom. Emily met the judge's gaze. Her eyes were defiant. She slowly stood up and headed for the exit, but Jason Taylor intercepted her at the door. "Miss Reed, I'd like to ask you a few questions." "I have no answers for you, Mr. Taylor," she replied coldly and walked out into the hallway. By evening, tensions in Pine Creek had reached a fever pitch. Judge Hollis announced that the verdict would be announced the following day, giving both sides time to prepare statements regarding the new publicly disclosed documents. Midwest shares fell 30% after documents similar to those shown by Patrick Reed appeared online and were picked up by the national media. Robert Hollis drove home feeling a strange sense of relief. Today's events had taken the situation out of his control, but paradoxically, they had lifted a moral dilemma from his shoulders. Now that the evidence was public, he had legitimate grounds to consider it in his decision. His phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "We need to meet. The house on the lake, 9 p.m. It's a matter of life and death. E." Robert knew which house they were talking about, an abandoned hunting lodge by a lake 5 miles outside of town, where he and Emily had met a couple of times early in their relationship. He hesitated. The smartest thing to do would be to ignore the message and be done with it, but something in the tone of the message, a matter of life and death, made him turn onto the road leading to the lake. The cabin looked abandoned, but light was coming through the cracks in the shutters. Robert cautiously approached the door and knocked. "Emily?" No one answered. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and went inside. The fireplace was lit, bathing the room in a warm, orange glow. There was a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses on the table. One was half empty. "Emily?" Robert called again, moving deeper into the house. The only sound was the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Opening the bedroom door, Hollis froze. Emily was lying on the bed. Her eyes were open but lifeless. A pool of blood had spread across her chest, soaking her blue blouse. "My God, no," Robert whispered, rushing to the girl. He felt for her pulse, but there was none. Her body was still warm. She had died recently. At that moment, he heard a noise behind him and felt a sharp blow to the head. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was a second figure lying in the corner of the room, a man whom he recognized with horror as Patrick Reed. Sheriff Carson received an anonymous call around 11 p.m. The voice reported gunshots at a hunting lodge by the lake. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Judge Hollis's car at the entrance. Inside the lodge, a horrific scene awaited them. The bodies of Emily Reed and Patrick Reed with gunshot wounds. A gun lay on the floor next to the man. Signs of a struggle indicated that the victims had put up a desperate fight. Judge Hollis was nowhere to be found, but there were marks on the floor that looked like they had been made by dragging a heavy body. A trail of blood led from the house to the lake, where it ended at the water's edge. "God, Robert, what have you done?" whispered the sheriff, staring at the dark surface of the lake, which now held yet another secret of Pine Creek. 3 days after the tragedy at the lake, the whole of Pine Creek was buzzing like an agitated beehive. The local newspaper ran a huge headline: Judge Hollis, murderer or victim? Officially, the police declared the judge missing and the prime suspect in a double murder. Divers searched the lake but found no bodies. Local hunters combed the surrounding woods to no avail. It was as if the judge had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and suspicions. Sheriff Carson was sitting in his office studying the crime scene reports when Jason Taylor walked in. "Any news?" asked the assistant district attorney. No sign of Robert. Carson rubbed his eyes wearily. But the details of the murder are becoming clearer. Patrick Reed was killed first, shot in the back. Emily died from a shot to the chest at close range. The gun had fingerprints from both Reed's and a third person, presumably Hollis. "That doesn't sound like Robert." Jason shook his head. "I've known him for almost 10 years. He could have gotten tangled up in a relationship, but murder? People break sometimes, son," the sheriff sighed. "Especially when everything they believed in is falling apart. Or the killer wants us to think that," Jason said, pulling documents out of the folder. "I dug into Patrick Reed's past. He had serious ties to environmental activists, but not only them. Shortly before his death, he was in contact with Werner Schmidt, Midwest's main competitor on the East Coast. You think it's corporate games? I don't think anything, just gathering facts." At that moment, a young officer entered the office. "Sheriff, you'd better see this." At Pine Creek Hospital, Margaret Hollis sat at her husband's bedside. Robert had been found unconscious in an abandoned barn 5 miles from the hunting lodge, beaten, dehydrated, and suffering from severe head trauma. Doctors had placed him in an induced coma to reduce brain swelling. "How is he?" Jason Taylor paused in the doorway. "Stable. The doctors say the injuries are serious, but he's tough," Margaret said, her eyes fixed on her husband's face. "Strange, isn't it? All my life, I knew him as a man of principle, a man of the law. And now everyone thinks he's a murderer." "Not everyone, Mrs. Hollis, and we have some new leads." Jason showed her his smartphone with a video open. "This is footage from a gas station camera 2 miles from the hunting lodge. The time is the evening of the murder." The grainy image showed a black SUV with no license plates. A man in a cap and dark jacket was quickly filling a gas can. "That's Michael Dawson, head of security for Midwest," Jason explained. "Former special forces. You think the company took out Emily and her uncle to shut them up?" Margaret looked up at him. "And pinned it on your husband. Perfect move. Discredit the judge and his verdict, get rid of the whistleblowers in one fell swoop." Panic reigned in the Midwest Chemicals office. CEO Richard Foster paced his office while his assistants gathered documents to shred. "How could this happen? We covered all our bases." "Sir, the police found the judge," his assistant reported. "He's alive." "Damn it! Dawson promised it would look like suicide." "There's another problem. Miss Reed was recording." "What recording?" "She recorded all her meetings with the judge, including the one where they discussed the pollution documents. It seems like it was part of her plan all along, to gather evidence for Schmidt." "A double agent? She was working for Werner?" Foster slumped into a chair. "For the environmentalists and for Schmidt. She was getting paid by both sides." The door burst open. "Police! Everyone stay where you are." 6 months later, Robert Hollis sat on the porch of his house, looking out at the autumn garden. After coming out of a coma, it took him 2 months of intensive therapy to regain his speech and motor functions. It took another 3 months to fully recover his memory of the events of that fateful night. Margaret came out onto the porch with 2 cups of tea. "Jason called," she said, sitting down next to him. "Foster and the others will be sentenced next week. The prosecutor is seeking the maximum sentence for contract killing and attempted murder of a federal judge." "That's fair," Robert said quietly. "Do you really feel nothing for her, after everything?" Margaret asked cautiously. Robert was silent for a long time, searching for the right words. "I feel regret. Emily used me, yes, but she really wanted justice for her father. She just chose the wrong way to get it." "So did you," Margaret remarked softly. "So did I," he agreed, "and we both paid the price." He remembered the last moments in the hunting lodge, how he had come to after being hit and saw Michael Dawson standing over Emily and Patrick's bodies with a gun. "You're next, Judge. Nothing personal, just business," Dawson had said before hitting him with the butt of the gun and dragging him out to stage a suicide at the lake. If it hadn't been for a group of teenagers picnicking on the shore, Dawson would have finished the job. Instead, he was forced to leave the judge for dead in an abandoned barn, hoping he wouldn't survive. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked, interrupting his memories. "Justice," Robert replied. "All my life I thought justice was blind obedience to the letter of the law. Now I realize it's more complicated than that." "Will you go back to work?" "No. My time on the bench is over," he said, looking at his trembling hands. "But I can teach, share my experience, warn others about the mistakes I made." Margaret took his hand. "You've always been a good teacher." "I wasn't a good husband," he said quietly. "And I still don't understand why you came back. Because underneath all the mistakes, you're still the same man I married. A man who believes in the right things, even if he sometimes strays from the path." Deep inside the house, the phone rang. "That must be Alex," Margaret said, getting up. "He's coming over with the kids for the weekend." Left alone, Robert looked at the headline of the newspaper lying on the table. "Midwest plant closure will leave hundreds jobless. City seeks alternatives." The environmental disaster had been averted, and those responsible had been punished, but the price was high for many. That evening, Jason Taylor and Sheriff Carson sat in a bar on the outskirts of town. "Funny how things turned out," Jason said, staring into his glass. "Emily used the judge to get information for Schmidt. Schmidt used her to undermine Midwest. Midwest eliminated her to cover up its crimes, and almost no one thought about justice, except maybe Patrick." "What about you?" asked the sheriff. "Did you think about justice when you uncovered this case?" Jason paused. "I thought about what Robert taught me, that the law isn't just words on paper. It's a living system that's supposed to protect people." "Good lesson," Carson nodded. "Yes, it's a shame it costs so much." They raised their glasses in a silent toast to those who could not be brought back, and to the fact that the truth, albeit through bloody means, had prevailed. At Pine Creek Cemetery, a fresh bouquet of wildflowers lay on Thomas Reed's modest gravestone. 2 new graves had appeared nearby, Emily's and Patrick's. Emily's stone bore a simple epitaph. She sought justice. She got justice in the end, though not as she had planned. It is a great irony of life that we often achieve our goals in ways we did not foresee or choose. Normal life gradually returned to Pine Creek. The town healed the wounds left by scandal and tragedy. The river slowly cleared. And although many lost their jobs due to the closure of the plant, a new company was already making plans to open an environmentally friendly production facility. Justice had been served, and the shadows hanging over the town gradually dissipated, giving way to hope for a better future.